Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Include a Charity's webinar series. I'm Anna Luna, and I'm the campaign coordinator for Include a Charity. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, A Legacy Fundraising Telemarketing Campaign. The presentation will be provided to you after the webinar. If you have any questions during the webinar for our presenters, please type them in the text box on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will speak for about 45 minutes, and we will allow time for questions at the end. This series of Include a Charity webinars are offered as an exclusive supporter benefit for staff of Include a Charity supporter organizations. It is only made possible by a support of FIA's corporate sponsor, GoFundraise, who is hosting this webinar for us, and by the contributions of our guest speakers. A special thank you to GoFundraise. I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Rosie Lempriere joined Cornucopia Consultancy in 2016 after working in charity fundraising for more than 5 years. As the Sydney-based client manager for outbound calling programs, she enjoys working with a wide variety of charities on acquisition and retention campaigns, including Bequest prospecting and development. Melanie Verges began her career in fundraising almost a decade ago and has been specializing in legacy giving since 2012. She became a Sydney-sider in 2015 and leads the legacy fundraising team at UNICEF Australia. You can usually find her at the beach on hot days with her dog. Welcome and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Off to you.
Hello again. My name is Melanie Verges, and as Anna mentioned, I'm the Legacy Fundraising Manager here at UNICEF Australia. I'm currently based in Sydney, and I've been with UNICEF for almost a year now. I was previously at the RSPCA of New South Wales, and I've been working in this space for almost a decade.
Hi everyone, I'm Rosie Lempriere, and it's a pleasure to be doing this webinar today with Melanie on behalf of Include a Charity. As Anna mentioned, I joined Cornucopia nearly 18 months ago, having worked with them when I was at House with No Steps in the role of regular giving manager. In fact, House with No Steps was the first ever outbound calling client for Cornucopia, and my experience of Cornucopia had been really positive in terms of value and management. As Anna mentioned, I mainly focus on Sydney-based clients, and UNICEF was a new client for me and for Cornucopia.
Funny photo.
Absolute pleasure to work with them.
So just to give you a little bit of background about UNICEF, UNICEF stands for the United Nations Children's Fund, and UNICEF has been around for 72 years. We work in over 190 countries and territories. We work to protect and promote children's rights by advocating for their rights. Our programs focus on education, child protection, child survival, nutrition, water, sanitation, and hygiene, and aid in emergencies.
Cornucopia works only for not-for-profit organisations. It was originally established as a face-to-face agency and is a leader in the sector for professional and high-quality face-to-face acquisition. Our outbound calling services commenced 3 years ago, and last year we also launched Fans Donate, a unique social media digital fundraising campaign. Our call centre is based in Brisbane, and we have an intimate call centre of 36 seats, although expanding, featuring a diverse group of callers from many cultural backgrounds. We began our Bequest calling campaigns very soon after outbound calling started, and our first campaign was with Bush Heritage, who has continued to work with us on their Bequest development. Our Bequest calling campaigns have covered a diversity of causes, but one thing in common with them is sizable volume of long-term loyal supporters. So I'll hand over to Melanie now to start talking about the very exciting UNICEF Bequest campaign.
So this legacy fundraising program is directly funded from our main office in Geneva, and they set us a goal to acquire 1,000 new prospects into the legacy pipeline by the end of 2017. I started with UNICEF Australia in May, so essentially we had 6 months to achieve this what at the time seemed like a very lofty goal. In UNICEF Australia's past, legacy fundraising had not been a main organizational priority. So the donors that we had in the database, they weren't used to hearing from the legacy team in a very personal way, mostly just receiving appeals and the annual report and the like. And this was a barrier for us. We needed to reach this new prospect goal quickly and ensure that the leads that we got were of quality. We decided to reach out to donors who were already in the database to re-engage them and to ensure that, that they were hearing from us in a personal way. And we really knew that telemarketing was the only way to achieve this goal quickly. And we definitely wanted the conversation to feel more conversational and stewardship in nature. So getting started and how we got ready for this campaign, we did a request for proposal to 4 different telemarketing agencies, all in New South Wales. And Cornucopia was the clear choice. We had preliminary discussions with them, and they took us through their campaign approach and things that we needed to consider to ensure that we exceeded this goal that we had of 1,000 new prospects. Cornucopia had extensive experience in Bequest calling, and their results really spoke for themselves. They showed in detail the projections for the campaign, as well as explained their strategy for this unique kind of calling, and that's really what sold us on Cornucopia. We also knew that in order to make the most of this telemarketing campaign, we would need data analytics done to better understand the legacy donors before calling commenced. We had John Wright of Wright Approach Marketing to do a database-wide analysis of our donors. We worked closely with him to create an affinity score so that we could segment our donors accurately, again, ensuring that we were calling the best quality leads within our database. We then used the Score-O-Matic tool within Razor's Edge to implement this affinity score, and again, that helped with our segmenting. We did a pre-engagement mailer that was printed by Advanced Mailing Solutions in Victoria that I'll talk about in more detail soon. And our data team worked very closely with Cornucopia on pulling the segments needed for calling. And the best part about this is Cornucopia worked closely with us on the calling script, and that was a very smooth process. And I actually flew up to Cornucopia's main office in Brisbane and met the calling team and did some training on what UNICEF Australia does.
So in the next 3 slides, I would like to cover the general framework on how Cornucopia approaches bequest calling. And this is the type of background we discussed with UNICEF when they first looked at planning. So we look at 2 components. One, which you see on the left-hand side, is discovery, which covers existing supporters who have no bequest status recorded. And here the focus is on appeal donors and regular givers. Also for charities with a raffle program, this would include your raffle players. And these are those supporters who have loyal and long-term giving history, being that their first gift was at least 5 years ago and that they had given at least 5 gifts. So basically they'd given annually. It's ideal to capture more mature age donors if you have this information, but usually you don't. So longevity of giving or cash giving as a preferred payment is a good indication. I have deliberately listed the inclusion of both active and lapsed donors when considering who to call, because we have seen higher success in some campaigns with donors who gave for many years but haven't for perhaps 3 years or more. Added to this are supporters who have engaged with your events and communications other than in giving donations, and we'll talk more about pre-engagement later. So the second component on the right-hand side is development, which covers existing supporters who already have some level of bequest status. Usually for charities who are doing their first calling campaign, this status has often come from donor surveys, which was the case with UNICEF. So before calling, any supporters that are part of development will have an existing bequest status, and every charity has their unique naming and configuration of these statuses. If Cornucopia achieves a positive outcome from the calling, what we describe as a conversion, we work on 3 main categories that comprise different levels of potential for bequest giving. First, interested, then intending, considering, which covers a broad range, and these are sometimes split into 2 separate ones, and ultimately confirmation or reconfirmation if the supporter has a status of confirmed already. We'll come back to this when we look at UNICEF's results and when talking about follow-up. Now, the last piece of general background I want to cover is Cornucopia's general benchmarks for calling outcomes, so we can look at UNICEF's campaign in context. I have chosen 4 key outcomes, and in all of them, I wanted to highlight the wide range of outcomes we have seen. So going clockwise from top left, voice contact varies considerably from 35% up to 75%, depending on the quality of data and level of engagement. Voice conversion from 10% to 75%, depending on the existing status, the charity's donor engagement and the strength of the proposition. Cost per conversion outcome can range from between $80 to nearly double at $150. And last, we expect that between 5 to 10% of conversions will include confirmed bequesters. So what did we project for UNICEF's campaign? On the one hand, we considered the strength of the UNICEF brand and proposition, being for every child and having a lifelong impact. On the other hand, though, UNICEF was new to us and we had never called their supporters before. When we put together the projections, UNICEF was looking to use donor surveys from the previous couple of years, both responders and non-responders, to inform who we would call, and we worked on 3 categories from this. There were 2 development categories: those who identified from the surveys as being confirmed, which you see at the top, those intending and considering in the middle, and 1 discovery category, which included those donors who hadn't responded to the survey. And hence we have 3 very different projection scenarios. We considered voice contact would be relatively strong across all 3 categories at around 50 to 55%. But we took a more conservative approach to conversion outcomes, ranging from 50% with confirmed status at the top, 25% in the middle, and 11% with new prospects at the bottom, giving a range of cost per outcome between $25 at the top to $125 at the bottom. So now Melanie can talk about what happened next with the selection and campaign planning.
So we knew that in order to get the most bang for our buck, we wanted to segment the callers, and we did that again through the affinity scoring. As I mentioned earlier, we worked with John Wright to create this affinity score for our entire database so that we could more precisely select donors for this campaign. Things such as age and any existing bequest and legacy information gave a higher score. And we also, as Rosie mentioned, looked at past giving history and tenure as well. We didn't have a lot of information on age within our database, so that didn't play a very large part in this affinity score. The highest potential score for a current donor is 23. This affinity information was put back into our database through the Score-O-Matic module in Razor's Edge. And the nice thing about that is we're able to run this as often as we'd like so that we can capture new donors coming into the pipeline and they can get an affinity score as well. And it also helps track how our donors move through the pipeline because it captures that information. So you can see on your screen kind of how it broke down for us, the things that we looked at to make this scorecard. Again, the nice thing about this is it worked for our legacy campaign, but this is the kind of thing you can easily use for major donors or other kinds of prospects within your database. And this slide just shows you how our donors fit into each scoring band. We knew for this telemarketing campaign, we would start by reaching out to those with the highest affinity score for leaving a gift in their will. We wanted to reach out, especially to the people who had filled out the donor survey, reconfirm them and let them hear from us in a very conversational manner. So we have quite a few in the 5 to 6 and 3 to 4 and 1 to 2 score bands. Again, for this campaign, we focused on those with a higher affinity score to really give us the boost that we needed to reach that 1,000 prospect goal. At the suggestion of Cornucopia, we sent out a pre-engagement mailer. We wanted to do something unique for this campaign, something a little different. So we had a seed card created. This is actually a handmade paper, handmade in Australia, embedded with swan river daisies. The idea of this pre-engagement mailer was not necessarily to mention that they would be hearing from Cornucopia soon, but rather to get the UNICEF name in front of the callers before they heard from us. We sent these to about half of the records that we called. We only had budget for about half of the records. It did not have a direct impact on results. It did not impact the outcome of the calls, but we felt like it was a very nice engagement piece from for our donors to hear from us. We got great feedback about this engagement mailer that we heard later through the calls. People liked having something a little different. It's a plantable card, and we had a couple comments say, "Oh, I'm going to plant this with my grandkids." Again, it's really just a small thank you piece that got the UNICEF name in front of our callers about 2 to 3 weeks before they actually heard from the Cornucopia callers.
So with UNICEF's donor scoring work guiding the campaign selection, we started with 3,500 supporters among the 3 categories. So that included 215 pledges with confirmed status, 658 supporters with intending or inquiring status, and then we had 2,611 prospects who had a donor score of 7 or above. But it became pretty obvious very quickly when we started calling that our projections were going to be surpassed. So UNICEF decided to include nearly 3,000 more of the prospects with a donor score of 5 to 6. And so all up, we attempted to call 6,400 supporters. So Bequest calling is very much about engaging in a conversation about the supporters' passion and commitment for the charity. So the calls are much longer and slower paced than those for acquisition or retention programs. And just going back to the pre-engagement mailer piece and the recommendation to do that, an added reason for that is because it provides a lovely intro and engagement piece for the callers at the beginning of the conversation and encourages supporters to open up about what, why UNICEF is important to them. For our callers, we find that they absolutely love the experience of doing Bequest calling, and we work closely to train them to have a very relaxed, gentle and respectful approach. And as part of the soft approach, we also make sure that we don't attempt more than 3, we don't make more than 3 contact attempts, so less attempts than you would with an acquisition campaign. So Melanie's going to talk later about the qualitative value of the calls and her experience in listening to UNICEF supporters speak about what UNICEF means to them. First, I'm going to cover the quantitative results, which I appreciate is going to be a bit intense, but we're fundraisers and we love data.
Right? Yes, we do. Love data.
So first, on the left-hand side, our overall voice contact was 48%. So we were able to have a conversation about the potential for leaving a gift in their will to nearly half of UNICEF supporters, which is a very strong contact rate and we believe indicative of UNICEF's strong donor engagement. 39% of these gave some level of positive response, and we achieved 877 new hand raises for UNICEF, which comprised nearly 88% of their total goal of 1,000 from all their Bequest fundraising activity for the year. So looking on the right-hand side, you can see how the campaign performed against the projections for the 3 categories. Overall, the conversions and cost per outcome results exceeded targets for all three categories. I've put the targets in brackets so you can compare them against performance. So they're there for all three in the two discovery groups. Significantly, the outcomes for the two discovery groups were virtually the same. So the first group with a donor score of 7+, 32% conversion, and the second group with that donor score of 5 to 6, 33% conversion. But I'm going to come back to those results a bit later on. So if you go back to our benchmarks, these results set a new level and is a wonderful acknowledgement, we think, of the fundraising work at UNICEF to have such engaged and responsive supporters. On voice contact, we did set high rates in our projections. So for our next campaign, we would look to moderate these. Here you can see the composition of the conversions overall in the table at the bottom, and you can see we ended up with 4 outcome categories. Typically, we would expect the majority to be in the inquiry interested category, but for UNICEF, the majority of responses are in the next tier of considering. You can see almost 61%. One thing I want to highlight here, which relates to scripting and bequest status management, is the need to clarify expectations around the meeting of these categories, especially in that intending, considering the sort of middle area, because our callers can't expect supporters to use words that match up exactly with these category names. So we work closely with them on how they need to sometimes judge which is appropriate, that meets with the definition and understanding for the charity that we're involved with. What I wanted to cover here as well is some general guide for a bequest campaign investment. So as a direct outcome, there is the ability to project a potential value and ROI based on an average bequest from the type of supporters you would include in this type of calling campaign. So we're not talking about major donor averages, but your general appeal donor. Of course, to accurately project the long-term outcome requires much more detailed and sophisticated calculations on the proportion of these that would likely to be realised overall and within each category, and the ongoing development to maintain the interest. In terms of costs, Melanie was happy for me to advise that the total campaign cost for UNICEF for all calling and setup was around $43,000, and that equates to around a $36 per positive outcome. This result is extremely cost effective, we think, for UNICEF's goals for this campaign. So last, on quantitative results, this is the most intensive slide, and this is the matrix of how the status before calling and the status outcome from calling evolved. And this, as you would all know, is the dynamic of this type of fundraising, that the bequest status of your supporters requires ongoing conversation and development. So along the top of the table are the 3 categories for calling according to their status before calling. And in the left column, you can see the 4 categories of the calling outcomes. So if you look at the pledges who had a confirmed status at the start of calling, you'll see of those people we spoke to, 68% of them have reconfirmed that they've left a gift in their will, while others have indicated that they've changed that status. With the intending group, on the other hand, in the middle, we've got 17 supporters that indicated that they've moved from intending or inquiring to confirming that they've left a gift in their will for UNICEF Australia. I'll leave you to look at this slide in your own time, and because there's a lot of figures in there and a lot to absorb. But for now, I just want to touch on the points above. So I've included 3 points that really focus on the confirmation outcome of calling. And in particular, I wanted to talk on the second point, which goes back to my earlier comment about the 2 discovery prospects groups. While they did have virtually the same overall rate of positive outcomes, which we talked about before being 33% and 32%, if you look at the outcomes by different type, you can see that the 7+ group has double the rate of confirmed bequesters than the 5 to 6 score group. But anyway, it's not just about the figures, and Melanie will talk about the qualitative outcomes now.
The most helpful aspect of this entire campaign for us was being able to read the comments taken from the actual phone calls. Since I am essentially a team of 1, this was incredible for me. I can't reach out to 6,000 donors, but through Cornucopia, I was able to get to know 6,000 donors. Cornucopia's team took incredibly detailed notes from each and every phone call, whether it was, this donor's not available. They said, please try back in 3 hours, to incredibly personal stories. While hitting our overall targets was important, through these comments, I was able to get to know our supporters better. And I've been able to select donors who already are engaged with UNICEF, but I now know people who will need more direct contact from me. I learned about people, a woman who has been volunteering in Cambodia for years and always tries to donate money that will help with mosquito nets. I've learned about people who were going to plant the seed card with their grandchildren, people who not only want more information, but want to know specifically what their gift and will can do for children in the future. I truly believe that when doing a telemarketing campaign for this kind of, for bequests, for this particular area of fundraising, this is the part that's pure gold. It helps you get to know people who already know your organization, especially if you prospect first within your organization, within your database, the way that we did. It helps you get to know them and you can figure out what more personal contact you need. This is the kind of thing that will help you determine who gets more of a bespoke level of nurture and communication. And just the overall quality of the callers and the reports that we got back from Cornucopia really helped us, yes, hit our 1,000, our overall goal for the year, but it really helped inform the donor journeys that different people will be on after the phone calls. So the campaign follow-up, we had donors that requested hard copies of the brochure be sent to them, or that the brochure would be sent by email. So I decided to put them onto 2 different tracks. The people who said in the phone call, yes, please send me a hard copy of the brochure. When I got those reports back to me, I always called them and said, hi, this is Melanie from UNICEF. Thank you so much for requesting this brochure. Do you have any specific questions, or would you just like some general information mailed to you? I didn't reach everyone, but it was a nice way for them to hear from me. And then the hard copy brochure was mailed to them with a personal letter signed by me. Again, these numbers were very manageable. Hopefully in 5 years, I will have too many people that I can't do this personally. That's the goal. And then we have decided to follow up with people after 6 months. There's a lot of talk in the industry. How often do you circle back to these people? I've heard 2 months, I've heard a year. I decided on 6 months because this is a very personal decision. So we're just getting to the point now where I will start to plan out when I will circle back to these people via phone call. And these people are placed into a segment that will receive hard copy newsletters. I decided that because this group asked for a brochure by hard copy, that I would not put them on an email journey. I would send them things in the same method that they requested, which is by mail. So in a year's time, I will put these people on a DM journey to start receiving our appeals. It's a great opportunity to try and boost other KPIs within your organization. You can't talk about legacies every single communication. You can talk about your organization and put them on a donor journey to keep them involved. And those who requested the brochure by email, I sent a personal email with the brochure attached, again asking if they wanted personal, more detailed information or just general information, and invited them to follow back with me if they had further questions or just wanted to learn more about our work on the ground. And again, I have decided to follow the same 6-month follow-up time period. In 6 months, I will be calling these people for those that we have phone numbers. Well, we obviously have phone numbers for them because we called them in the first place. So I'll be circling back with them via phone call or email if I'm not able to reach them. These people are immediately placed into a segment that will receive content emails from UNICEF. And then in 1 year's time, they will also start to receive EDM appeal emails. Because we had a larger group of people wanting information by email, it was easier to go ahead and put them on that donor journey to start receiving content emails from UNICEF Australia. One thing to note, any of these people that we called who were already receiving information, we did not change their donor journey. So if we called someone who happened to be a monthly donor, we did not derail their current donor journey. We only set donor journeys for people who were not already receiving communications from us. And depending on their affinity score, some of these people did become part of my top tier of people that I will be meeting with personally. It really just takes sorting through with your own eyes, looking at these results, saying, oh, this person looks like they would need some personal stewardship, and there's potential to grow their current giving. So it's really looking at the bigger picture for all of this.
So lastly, I would like to finish by going back to what Cornucopia thinks is a really important issue in the planning, and that is the follow-up journey, like Melanie has just outlined. So before we call, we need to know what to tell supporters when they've made this extraordinary, wonderful pledge or demonstrate their valuable support or interest, so they know how they're going to be acknowledged after the phone call. So I've included this list of questions from our perspective on what we encourage you to think about as part of the planning. So after those call outcomes come through, it's very clear exactly what you are going to do with each type of outcome. So thank you so much for listening. I hope I've provided some useful information, and if you're considering telemarketing for your Bequest fundraising, and also our contact details are in this presentation, and feel free to send through an email if you want to ask me something specifically after today, if something comes up that you hadn't thought about right now.
And thank you from me as well. I can't emphasize enough just how transformative this was for the UNICEF Australia Legacy Fundraising Program. We did 6,400 records last year. We will be doing about 6,000 records with Cornucopia this year. We will be diving down a little further into the affinity scores. We're very excited to see the results for this year. We have a higher target. We have 2,000 prospects to reach this year. And so we will be working with Cornucopia this year in 2 different capacities, actually, and hopefully next year as well. So we will have a lot more to report as we continue this great partnership.
So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in that little box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll give you a couple of minutes.
I did say I would shout out to my colleagues back at the office. Hello. Richard, if you're listening.
Nothing coming through.
Just one last point. If you're considering doing telemarketing for this unique area of fundraising, I think it's absolutely worth doing. especially if you're a smaller team, you can't reach out to all of your supporters. Telemarketing is a really great way to do that. It helps you get to know people that are already in your database. The results would differ a little bit depending on the size and engagement level of your supporters, but it's definitely the best thing that we did last year.
We have one question. I can't see it. Why can't I see it? Curious about the percentage of supporters who requested the information pack by email.
I don't have that figure to hand.
We had about 200 people request the brochure by email, and then we had about 80 request the hard copy. So they were very manageable numbers for me to do. Those are approximates, but I know that it was around 80 that requested the hard copy, around 200 that requested the email. So they were very manageable numbers. I was able to personally, do those 80 letters, sign 80 letters, and, personally write the address and put stamps on those. And then the 200 emails, those go very quickly. You just copy and paste and then tweak the name. I sent those personally from my email address throughout this campaign. So it was, several a day for the length of this. Not overwhelming numbers, but a very good manageable amount of people that I now have a direct connection with. And all of the others, essentially like raised their hand saying, yes, I'm interested. And that for us constitutes a positive prospect for our pipeline.
That's it. Wait, one more, Rowan. 1 second, please. Please say, Rowan Wishard's asking, please say something more about including the confirmed people. Why?
So we wanted to reach out to people who have confirmed that we were already in their will because we hadn't spoken to them personally ever. We hadn't really had a lot of phone calls with these people, and so we felt it was worth including them and tweaking those scripts a little bit by saying, oh, we see that you have mentioned you're including UNICEF in your will. That's so great. Do you have further questions about UNICEF or the work that they're doing? Or would you like any more personal contact from UNICEF? As fundraisers, we know people can change their mind, and it was a way to reconfirm their interest in leaving a gift in their will to UNICEF. So we did have people that we called who were already confirmed, and they stayed confirmed, which is great. We did not see that as a negative at all. We knew that we would be reaching out to people that had already said, yes, you're in my will. It was a way to kind of get the pulse on how they were feeling about UNICEF. And so, if we had called someone who said, you're not in my will anymore, well, that's also a great reason to then reach out to them further.
Yeah, so added to that from Cornucopia's view, with discussions, for most of those, the only indication had been through one particular survey. So there'd just been one type of contact and no verbal contact. And you can see from the outcome with that group, with the mix and the change, that it was really important to sort of delve into that further through conversation, and also in order to support that interest, to be able to get some information about how those donors wanted to be communicated with from UNICEF, and to understand what the motivation behind it was, to also feed into UNICEF's understanding of what is going to encourage people to put a gift in their will. If you can sort of look at other supporters that are similar and give them the same sort of propositional story.
1 minute, please. Thank you for joining us for a fantastic webinar today. Tomorrow you will receive a copy of the webinar and a survey. Should you like to hear a specific topic in the future, then please email us at includedcharity@fia.org.au. Our next webinar will be in May and be on the topic of Included Charity Week. This webinar is open